start, I just asked.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I have a very specific question that if you don't mind, Melanie, I will ask you afterwards, just partly because we're actually talking to the Department of Defense in the US for some potential funding. So love to get your feedback on that. So, okay, so I'm Jane. I'm CEO of Atorvia, and I'm a life sciences industry veteran of 20 something years. And together with my team of former pharma leaders, we're working on a drug to prevent kidney complications that occur during heart surgery. I know a lot of people are not necessarily aware that this is an issue. So I wanted to share with you what one of our advisors has told us, preferably with going forward. So Dr. Morrison is a cardiac, and I'm going to use the Scottish word anaesthetist because an anesthesiologist is a bit of a tongue twister, but he's an anesthesiologist from Toronto, and ultimately is fully responsible for cardiac surgery patients. So he treats them, he's the anaesthetist during the surgery, and he's also responsible for the ICU. And he told us that 80% of patients in his ICU at any point in time are there because of kidney complications that occur during the surgery. So it's a big problem. Unfortunately, there is actually nothing that physicians can do to prevent this complication. It is the biggest complication that occurs during surgery, and unfortunately, it can't prevent it. Just one episode of this can actually cause lifelong chronic disease, not just in the kidney, but potentially in the heart. It can cause stroke, it can cause diabetes, so it's devastating for patients. It's also incredibly costly. So $1.2 billion globally is in hospital costs, and that's not excluding readmission costs. It's extremely problematic for hospitals. It adds 30 million ward days every year, and patients are more likely to be admitted to the ICU, and when they spend 3 times as long when they're there. So we have developed a unique drug that actually prevents kidney failure from happening during surgery. And for the patient, we know that it prevents kidney damage and prevents complications. And importantly for our customers, the hospitals who would be our customers, it reduces hospital stay overall, including in the ICU, and reduces cost as well. How does it work? Well, during heart surgery, there's a reduced flow of oxygen to the kidneys that causes something quite unique to happen. This kidney cells become programmed to die. And it's a little bit like having a party balloon that's filled with glitter. Once you pierce the balloon with a needle and it pops, there's absolutely nothing that you can do to put that balloon back together again, and the glitter disperses. You can't reconstruct the balloon. Our drug actually stops the cells from dying. So it actually prevents, effectively, like the needle, it stops the needle from piercing the balloon in the first place, and it keeps the kidney cells alive. And that's quite different from our competitors, who are actually all going after the scattered bits of glitter and the burst balloon. So this is one of the reasons, excuse me, that we believe that we are uniquely placed to not just prevent kidney failure, but to do so safely and effectively. We're the only ones that stop cell death from happening. And although there are some competitors that do prevent kidney failure, we are also the only ones that have demonstrated in this setting proof of concept. We have a low cost of goods, and we know that we're heart safe. And obviously in cardiac surgery, that's something that's really important, is that we need to know that when we administer this drug, that it will actually be safe for those patients in other areas as well. We've made some significant progress. We have identified the cause of kidney failure. That's been published in the American Society for Microbiology. And we've developed a prototype drug, again, the details of which were published in the journal it's a nephrology journal. Working with Boston University, we've tested this in the laboratory, and we've also tested it in animals. And as a result of that, just this year, with partnership with Boston University, we have filed for composition of matter. And just to be clear, this is something that we are licensing from Boston University. As we move towards clinical studies, our plan for progress at the moment is to formulate our lead candidate. The drug as it stands just now, in order for us to be able to scale at a magnitude that we want, so our vision is to be able to use this drug in all patients undergoing surgery, we need to have low cost of goods. And so we're currently working with the NRC actually on looking at improving the manufacturing process, allowing us to scale at a cost and a magnitude that will allow us to do that. All of that IP, as we develop that, will be Atorvia owned IP. The other thing we're looking to do, we'll need to test in animals, and then ultimately with that final drug, reach clinical trials that we anticipate in 2027. We do think we might be able to do it sooner than that, but our experience with regulators is such that we know that there's always a delay. And so we've actually built that into our operating plan, allowing for delays with regulators. So overall, as far as our overall plan is concerned, our most likely path is acquisition. And we'll see in a moment, we're already engaging with strategic pharmaceutical companies that have an interest in this field in order to engaging them early and working alongside them as well. I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. But ultimately, as we're looking at the moment to raise a $1.5 million seed to get us to a drug that's ready for scale, and again, moving towards our clinical trials in 2027, where we believe that we may have a potential exit, and then again, further on as we go to phase 2 and phase 3, if we haven't exited already at that point. As a team, we have full cycle expertise from drug discovery through clinical trials and all the way through to commercialization. Myself, I've worked extensively in M&A, as well as drug development and commercialization. David is our Chief Business Officer, who in addition to being a serial CFO, has also extremely experienced in mergers and acquisitions and has successfully exited a number of companies himself. Nermeen is our Chief Medical Advisor. She is a clinical research specialist, has worked extensively both in CROs, the clinical research organizations, and also within pharmaceutical companies. Steve is our scientific advisor, and it's actually his work that this is based on. And then Merdul, who joined us recently this year, who is effectively the lead for being able to formulate the drug and translate it into clinical trials. And we're also in the process of employing somebody else. I mentioned before about working with strategic companies. Merck Pharmaceuticals, one of the top 5 pharmaceutical companies, recently sponsored us through a blue ticket winner through to Spin Up Labs in Toronto. So we have lab space in Toronto that is being paid for by Merck, and they are mentoring us in the process. Again, just to clarify, all of the work that we're doing remains our work. We don't have an agreement with them per se just yet. We recently graduated from Creative Destruction Labs as well, and we won the Effervescence Innovation Prize awarded by Johnson & Johnson earlier. Thank you. So so in addition to Merck, so we have Chris Tan from Merck who is advising us at the moment, but we also have other advisors as well. I mentioned Andrea Saylor, who is the former head of search and development for Novartis, with responsibility for their renal function, their renal business, and we've also working with Marcus Hergaard who's effectively from Novo Nordisk, based in Copenhagen. But the drug that we're developing is a peptide, and he is a peptide expert. We also have Ingo from Bayer, and again, Troy from Novartis, and Sigurd from Sprind, who again is a German organization that have successfully built and exited multiple biotechnology companies. So we're extremely fortunate to have these folks advising us as we progress. Oops. I wanted to mention a little bit about pricing. Although early, we have done some preliminary pricing research, and we do believe that we have something, because this is a one-off dose, and because this is so costly to hospitals, that there is a willingness to pay on the hospital's behalf. I apologize, that should be a comma. One Alberta hospital recently published a study on the number of patients undergoing surgery that develop kidney failure. So this is actual data from an Alberta hospital. Of the 2,000 patients that were undergoing surgery, 500 of them developed kidney failure, and it cost them an additional $8 million just to treat those patients, added 2,500 bed days, and ended up in $2.8 million in readmission costs. And that's because, as I've mentioned before, patients who develop this, even one episode, are more likely to develop long-term conditions. And so the readmission is also a big issue. Doing some preliminary work at $2,000 a dose, this is a single dose treatment, would save hospitals $7 million, as well as freeing up beds. And for Atorvia, or our partner, would be generating $1 million in revenue per hospital. And there's over 1,000 hospitals in Canada, so it gives you an idea of the magnitude of volume of sales.
1 minute remaining, Jane.
Okay, thank you. So the first indication we're looking at is high-risk cardiac surgery, and ultimately starting where we believe we can win before we eventually expand to other indications. I've mentioned that there's a lot of acquisitions in this field, so exit, I've mentioned, is one of our potential, is really our strategy, and it's very likely that that would happen around about phase 2. We are looking at raising $1.5 million in the form of a convertible note. We have been bootstrapped and grant funded to date, and this money will also allow us to unlock other funding opportunities as well. So in summary, we have a first-in-class therapeutic that prevents kidney failure during surgery. It's an unserved multi-billion-dollar market. We have compelling early data, a deep team expertise, and we're raising $1.5 million to allow us to reach our candidate in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that in the middle there.
No problem.
I see you took some of the lessons from yesterday.
I did.
Nice. Nice improvements there to your slides. Yeah. Okay, so we're ready for some feedback. Melanie, do you want to kick us off with some feedback for Jane?
Yeah, sure. Interesting. I remember this stuck out to me when we kind of had a couple of weeks ago, the intro. I would be curious to know a little bit more about how the peptide actually works. You did answer eventually that it's single dose.
Yes.
Given during surgery. So
Correct.
That might be nice to clear up right in the beginning. From the point of view of like the pitch and the length of the pitch, because it was kind of, you're struggling to get it short enough. I did notice initially, you could probably cut down on the amount of time that you're talking on the first kind of few slides.
Yeah.
Like I spent a little while telling us about Dr. Alex. And I think it's enough just to put him up there. It's like cardiac surgeon working in the ICU. Like he's obviously an expert, so we don't have to
Because of the preamble. Yeah.
to tell how awesome he is in the preamble. I would hit a little harder on, I like your slide about, where was it? Like differentiating you from the other drugs that are on the market. But I do like that has to be hit really hard. Like, you've said unique, kind of first in class, this and that. It's like, I almost, if this truly works the way you guys say it will work, it will be kind of immense for medicine. Like the potential is gigantic. Right now I also work as a coroner. So I'm a death investigator. So I go into a lot of ICUs. I read a lot of ICU medical files, and everybody has kidney failure, and I'm not there for the cardiac surgeries. I'm there for the accidents, right? And the overdoses, and all of the kind of non-natural deaths that are occurring in the ICU. So if there are indications, like, if you're developing it for cardiac surgery, but there are indications for all surgeries beyond cardiac surgery. And if there's also indication for giving a dose in the ER when a patient comes in and they are in, sepsis or going into hemorrhagic shock or kind of all of these things, if there's a chance that it could be given in the ER for unstable patients, then again, that greatly expands your, you know, your use of this drug. Because
I think it was a great idea, actually. I hadn't thought about the ER side, but yes, it is.
yeah, ER for sure, because so often, you know, people come in and they end up, by the time they leave the ER, they've been there for a couple hours and they're in kidney failure by the time they've left the ER, just because of that reduced blood flow from hypotension, either because they're bleeding out or because they're in shock. So those are kind of all other areas where if it also works there, that's
it is.
but it's slightly different mechanism of injury, so like of kidney cell injury. So there's that. The expertise is great, like so much experience in those last few slides. I don't know if you need to talk about it for as long. Maybe we'll see what Kelly says, the other investor, but like when I just see all those words of 30-year plus and 27-year plus, it's like I kind of believe you.
Enough. Yeah.
Like, and it's real companies. So again, that is also probably somewhere where you could cut that short. The glitter balloon analogy, someone probably worked with you on that. Like, how do we explain how this injury happens with the glitter balloon? I don't know if it's the right one. I'll think about it a little bit, because it's a different,
it's interesting. There's such different feedback on that from non-medical people like you. People will say, oh my God, I totally get it. That is the best way you could have.
Well, you know what? If non-medical people, if it helps them understand, then that's great. I'm coming at this from, I'm a doctor and a former engineer, so I'm like very rigid sometimes. So I'm like, well, that's not exactly how it happens, but that's just my weird brain. So if you're getting feedback from the non-medical people that helps them understand it, then great, stick with it, because it sort of fits. Okay. And I think I'll stop there for now, because we'll let Kelly.
Great, thanks, Melanie.
Thank you so much. It's great.
All right, Kelly, over to you.
Oh my goodness. First of all, very good. This is difficult. I just want to acknowledge you did a really good job. I'm a non-medical person, so I'm going to have some different feedback. I do work in adjacent to the space, but I would say I've got some overarching, almost transactional things that are going to be super easy for you to implement. I would echo what Melanie said. And I can give you specific points. You spent more time on the things I think that didn't matter. And I would encourage you, and I can give you specific direction. So I always find the beginning is the hardest. Doesn't matter how, like, so being really comfortable in your beginning. And it almost, you spent a lot of time explaining that person. And then I waited till the end to find out about your team. So my two overarching things are figure out where you want to spend the most time. And where you're going to flip through. I'm sure the other coaches have said this. It's like a minute a slide, right? So if you have 10 minutes, you got 10 slides. Like it's just basic math.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of time to spend. And if you know you need to spend 2 minutes on something, right? And you're like, I really need people to understand what we're doing. You got to save that time and protect the time. So the beginning, this is a preference thing, so you're going to get lots of feedback that's probably going to conflict, but I think the order of things is actually your biggest challenge. I think the order of things is the flow needs to work, because I felt like you were bouncing around. So specifically, you lead in with some kind of credibility, like here's kind of who we are, but then at the end you say it again. You mention your team. And then you mentioned the awards you've done. So kind of figure out where you want that. I think too, the highlights at the end, I'd almost bring that right to the beginning and then remind people when you close. It's almost like starting it out and saying, you know, here's our targets. And then, you know, at the end, it's kind of like a reminder. But I was actually at the end, I was like, oh, okay, wow, this is actually really makes sense to me. So I got a whole bunch of notes here. Pricing, you have pricing near the end, but at the beginning you're talking about the problem. And I actually thought you did a good job framing the problem. I like the glitter balloon. And I would say if you paired that with, you know, the more technical term and just say, technically here's, you know, the issue, but for the non, you know, folks in the room, you know, you can do the balloon thing. Maybe you do both. kind of a
Yeah.
mix of both
Yeah.
would be okay. Go to market was a bit complicated for me. I also was questioning, was like, is that your only strategy? Is your only strategy to go to market? Or sorry, not go to market, exit? Go to market and exit? Is exit your only plan? And maybe that is, and that's okay. But that felt a little clunky.
Yeah, I don't like that slide at all. And I
yeah.
have another in backup, which is there, like, to Melanie's point as well, sort of where else we could go with this, and actually some of the work that once we're focusing on this first, but there's other things in the background that if we don't get acquired, that we're actually sort of have plans. So I kind of kept that in backup, but it sounds as if maybe I should bring that forward as well.
Yeah, I do think kind of just moving stuff around is I think your biggest which is easy, right? Like I think it's easy because you've got the stuff. It's just finding the flow where you're not bouncing. You're like, oh, earlier I talked about credibility, and earlier like you're referencing, and that also, you use a lot of words when you do that.
True.
To kind of say, remember I talked about it. So grouping things in maybe sections. So you've got problem, right? You've got a great problem. You've got great highlights. I waited till the end to figure out, like, okay, what is this thing going to cost, right? So bringing that a little closer. You also didn't, where you did sort of throwing up the slide of who your team is great, and you just need one narrative that just says, collectively we have over, a bunch of years, and then move through it. What you didn't do is you didn't claim on your progress slide. It wasn't clear to me that was your progress or the industry's progress. Right?
Interesting. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
So if that's what you've achieved, be really proud of that. Maybe just write our progress, right? So these are the things that we've done, and being really clear. You could even just bring those logos up. You don't need to be coy about that. Like if you've got these people on your side, I waited till like the last minute to find out that you've actually got some pretty great partners, and you've got some pharma groups. And then I got one more comment, and then I can send you some other just small things. I just had a question. You said we've demonstrated it in this setting, but I didn't know what setting you were talking about. And maybe it was just I wasn't listening. But you talked about the setting, and I think I would echo Melanie. I think demonstrating use cases. So it's great to say, like, we know our stuff, we're really specific to kidney. But if there's other use cases or potential, that would be potential is a really good word in a pitch, because you're not committing, but the market. And then I'm always curious. It's just a human thing. I'm always curious about the name of the company. Yes.
Yeah, that's the I'm smiling. Yeah, that's true.
Significance, if there's any.
That's true. Yeah.
In the story. Because
it does mean we're so Ator was a famous French he's a fictional character, but was known for innovation in medicine via being path, but it's also an anagram of where we thought up the idea for the company in the first place. So
and my last thing, again, preference, always end with your ask. What do you want? What do you actually want?
Excellent.
All right.
That is phenomenal feedback. Thank you so much, both of you.